G'day lads, we're reacting to an article on Sports Illustrated titled "Re-signing Kelsey Mitchell is the no-brainer for Fever." It is the biggest no-brainer. I'm just putting it right here right now. It is the biggest no-brainer in the history of no-brainers. Because worst case scenario, if she doesn't want to come back or the Fever don't want her back, you sign her and you trade her. You do not let an all-W first-team player walk for nothing. That is the dumbest shit any...
That reaction is understandable. It's what happens when someone encounters a truly baffling take in sports journalism. Sports Illustrated recently published an article titled, "Re-signing Kelsey Mitchell isn't a no-brainer for the Fever," a claim that feels difficult to justify given Mitchell's impact. She is an all-WNBA first-team guard who helped lead Indiana to the best season in franchise history, yet her return is being framed as debatable. The timing makes the argument even more puzzling, as Mitchell enters unrestricted free agency after averaging 19.2 points per game alongside Caitlin Clark, forming a backcourt defined by clear chemistry and complementary skill sets. Mitchell spaced the floor, scored efficiently without dominating the ball, and provided Clark with the reliable secondary option she needed, making re-signing her appear like one of the simplest decisions the Fever could make this offseason. However, as outlined in Grant Young's article, the front office is encouraged to at least consider letting her walk, and while the take may seem like clickbait at first glance, it highlights a real and recurring dilemma across the WNBA, whether teams should prioritize proven fit and chemistry or pursue the possibility of a theoretical upgrade
when structuring its roster for 2026. Let's zoom back a bit. Every season, Indiana makes a revolver in Caitlin Clark and Leah Boston, their two young star players still under contract, along with whether a player fits head coach Stephanie White's schemes and coaching philosophies. Ironically, if that's what it's about, like if it's about head coach Stephanie White's schemes, you trade both Caitlin Clark and the Leah Boston. I mean that when I say that, you definitely trade Caitlin Clark. If you are building a team to fit Stephanie White's schemes, you trade Caitlin Clark. Like, most of re-signing Kelsey Mitchell is the first order of business.
Here is where the article presents an argument that deserves serious consideration. The defensive concerns surrounding Kelsey Mitchell are not entirely unfounded, as she is often labeled a below-average defender, and when paired with Caitlin Clark, who is not known as a defensive stopper, it creates a backcourt that opponents could potentially exploit in playoff settings. However, that reasoning weakens under closer examination. Last season, Mitchell regularly took on the most challenging defensive assignments, guarding opposing point guards more than any other player on the roster, and the data does not support the narrative that she is a defensive liability. On a scale where 50% represents league average, Mitchell grades comfortably above that threshold. While she may not be on the defensive level of players like Kalia Copper or Jackie Young, she is far from a weakness. The real issue is not whether Mitchell is defensively adequate, but whether Indiana can realistically upgrade the position without undermining the offensive chemistry it spent an entire season developing. This is where the article introduces a more compelling question. What if an elite two-way guard such as Jackie Young or Kalia Copper were to become available in free agency?
By who? The same people that say Caitlin Clark is the worst defender in the WNBA? Kelsey Mitchell is, no question about it, an above-average on-ball defender. She actually took most teams' point guards last year. Ironically, she's actually played really good defense last year. Truth is, Caitlin Clark is also a below-average defender. Neither of them are below-average defenders. If average is 50th percentile, Kelsey Mitchell's Caitlin Clark is in and around the average. He's in and around a 50th percentile defender. Kelsey Mitchell is a decent chunk over average. There are other free agent shooting guards available, such as Jackie Young, unless she really wants to go, and Phoenix Mercury standout Kalia Copper, who are elite defenders but also offensive threats. Yeah, but never at the same time. Like, that's the biggest problem with Kalia Copper and Jackie Young. When they want to be lockdown defenders, they stop scoring, and when they stop scoring, when they have their 30-point games, they stop playing defense. That's the biggest problem.
Now we arrive at the core of the discussion. Jackie Young is, by any objective measure, a more complete two-way player than Kelsey Mitchell. She is a three-time champion with the Las Vegas Aces, capable of elite perimeter defense when fully engaged, and she provides secondary playmaking that Indiana sorely needs when Caitlin Clark is off the floor. Kalia Copper offers a different, but equally impactful, skill set, physicality, downhill aggression, and a defensive edge that could fundamentally reshape Indiana's identity. On paper, either player represents an upgrade over Mitchell in specific areas. The flaw in this entire line of thinking, however, is that it is disconnected from reality. Jackie Young has just won her third championship, plays in a state-of-the-art facility, is fully supported as a professional, and competes for titles every season. There is little incentive for her to leave that environment for a Fever team that, despite clear progress, still faces facility shortcomings and remains 1 or 2 pieces away from legitimate championship contention. The article indirectly concedes this point by acknowledging that Indiana's facilities do not yet match those in Las Vegas or Phoenix. Until the Fever can offer a comparable professional infrastructure, they are unlikely to lure established stars away from proven winning situations, an unavoidable reality of WNBA free agency.
But not at the same time. They can do one or the other. It says here, they might have the same offensive upside as Mitchell, but defense would make Fever more well-rounded and less reliant on winning games via their shootout. First of all, Kahleah Copper is not leaving Phoenix. Until Indiana are able to get their facilities in check, which is not going to happen for next season, you're not going to be able to take any of the players that are in Phoenix because of the way they're being treated as pros. Indiana, they have their own facilities, but they're not great. You're not going to get her out of Phoenix. Jackie Young has won her third championship. Why the fuck would she want to leave the Aces? That's it. And also, if you don't re-sign Kelsey Mitchell and you're banking on getting one of 2 players, there are two players. There are 2 players. Ultimately, while it isn't a no-brainer, it's probably the first and correct choice.
Let's examine Kahleah Copper's situation, as it is marginally more realistic than the Jackie Young scenario. Copper is coming off a season in Phoenix that fell short of expectations, as the Mercury brought her in to serve as a veteran presence alongside Diana Taurasi and Brittany Griner, only to suffer a first-round playoff exit. Even so, the underlying logic remains flawed. Phoenix can offer Copper elements that Indiana currently cannot: an established winning culture and a fully developed professional infrastructure. The Mercury operate their own practice facility, prioritize player support, and continue to position themselves as immediate contenders despite the early postseason disappointment. Copper, Taurasi, and Griner started together throughout the season as a planned championship core. While the results did not materialize, the foundation remains intact. It is difficult to justify why Copper would walk away from that environment to join a Fever team still defining its identity under a new head coach. This exposes the central weakness in the Sports Illustrated argument. It suggests Indiana should consider letting Kelsey Mitchell leave based on the slim possibility that one of 2 elite players might choose to sign there. That is not strategic roster building. It is a gamble with the long-term stability of the franchise.
Grant Young with a V. Grant Young with a V. Alright, let's take a listen here.
Dominance.
There you go.
Fever's best free agency priority. This isn't about who the best guard is on paper. It's about what the Fever actually need next to Caitlin Clark. Indiana's biggest challenge right now isn't talent, it's clarity. Spacing, role definition, and keeping the offense readable. Kelsey Mitchell already gives them that. She spaces the floor, she scores without needing to dominate the ball, and the chemistry with Caitlin Clark is already there. She's not perfect defensively, but sometimes fit isn't about fixing every weakness. It's about protecting your strengths. There's also an organizational reality. Mitchell has been with the Fever her entire career. It matters to the locker room and the fan base.
This is where the conversation becomes more nuanced, because there is a scenario in which not re-signing Kelsey Mitchell could make sense, just not the one proposed by Sports Illustrated. If Kahleah Copper were genuinely interested in joining Indiana via free agency, and if another team were willing to offer substantial assets in a sign-and-trade for Mitchell, then Kelly Krauskopf would at least have to evaluate the option. Not because Mitchell lacks value, but because the long-term roster math might become more favorable. In that scenario, Indiana would first core Mitchell to ensure she does not leave for nothing, then actively shop her to teams in need of proven scoring in exchange for young players or high draft picks. That approach could allow the Fever to improve defensively by adding Copper while simultaneously accumulating assets for future flexibility. For example, Minnesota holds the 2nd overall pick in the 2025 draft and has a clear need for scoring. A sign-and-trade centered on Mitchell in exchange for that pick and a young player such as Alyssa Pillai could benefit both sides, giving Indiana the chance to select a top prospect like Azzi Fudd or Kiki Iriafen while adding Kappa's two-way impact. Similarly, Washington holds the 4th and 9th picks and is in dire need of veteran offense, making a Mitchell-centered package a potential pathway for Indiana to secure premium draft capital along with a young contributor like Emily Engsler. In this context, moving Mitchell would not be about doubting her talent, but about leveraging her value at its peak to reshape the roster more strategically.
You can go and get some younger players. You can go and trade her to the Mystics, who might be willing to part ways with 4-9 and someone like an Emily Engsler on a reserve free agency deal. They might be willing to part ways with something like that. Then that makes sense if you can bring in a like for like and then turn Kelsey Mitchell into lower assets. Or if Jackie Young wants to come you core and trade and both players get swapped. But at the end of the day, I think this is more devil's advocate, unless there's a situation where they can get way better.
The critical detail that ultimately renders much of this debate unnecessary is that the Indiana Fever possess enough salary cap flexibility to re-sign Kelsey Mitchell and still add another max-level player. They are not forced into an either-or decision, a reality the Sports Illustrated article largely overlooks. Unlike franchises such as Las Vegas or New York, Indiana is not operating under severe financial constraints and can comfortably bring Mitchell back on a competitive contract while also pursuing a free agent like Kahlia Copper, should she express interest. As a result, the real question is not Mitchell versus Copper, but whether Indiana is prepared to deploy a three-guard lineup featuring Mitchell, Caitlin Clark, and potentially Lexi Hull for extended stretches. The concern shifts to defensive viability and whether Stephanie White's system can support that type of backcourt. This is where the article's reference to White's coaching philosophy becomes relevant. If White intends to run a system that demands high-level defenders at every position, Mitchell's fit becomes more complex. However, if she is willing to design schemes that maximize Clark's offensive brilliance while mitigating defensive limitations, then Mitchell remains very much a central piece of Indiana's long-term plan.
I absolutely stand by. Like, I'm a YouTuber, I clickbait enough. I don't actually mind this, and I do think the two players you suggested, it makes perfect sense why you would want both of them. It actually makes perfect sense, but I don't think there's a realistic scenario where either of them want to come. But if Kat Copper does want to come to Indiana, and Kelsey Mitchell via core and trade is able to get a whole bunch of young assets to help Indiana long term, you have to at least consider it. You do, because we have to be completely real. The Indiana Fever cannot afford, in 2 years' time, the Indiana Fever cannot afford to keep Lexi Hull, Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlin Clark, and Leah Boston. And if delaying the inevitable, if making your team not as good this year and also delaying the inevitable, you might have to get rid of her in 2 years.
Let's strip away the hypotheticals and focus on reality. The Indiana Fever are going to re-sign Kelsey Mitchell, and it is not a difficult decision. In fact, it is one of the clearest roster decisions in recent WNBA history. Mitchell is an all-WNBA first-team guard coming off a season in which she averaged 19.2 points per game on strong efficiency, developed immediate and effective chemistry with Caitlin Clark, and helped lead Indiana to its most successful season in franchise history. She has been part of the organization since being drafted second overall in 2018, is deeply respected in the locker room, valued by the fan base, and is entering her prime at 28 years old. Even if one were to question her defensive ceiling or long-term fit, there is a simple principle that overrides all others: asset management. You do not allow an all-WNBA first-team player to leave an unrestricted free agency for nothing. That would be organizational malpractice. If Indiana determines down the line that Mitchell is not an ideal fit in Stephanie White's system, they can trade her and recover value. Letting her walk accomplishes nothing except weakening your roster while strengthening a competitor. The Fever do have legitimate roster decisions ahead. Aaliyah Boston will soon be extension eligible, Lexi Hull needs a new contract, and the frontcourt rotation requires clarity. However, none of those decisions justify sacrificing Mitchell without compensation. The message that would send coming off a playoff season, with a Rookie of the Year in Clark and a first-team All-WNBA guard in Mitchell, would undermine the momentum the franchise has worked to build. Continuity matters in the WNBA. The league's most successful teams, Las Vegas, New York, Connecticut have thrived by maintaining their core and making targeted additions, not by prematurely dismantling successful foundations. Indiana finally has that foundation in place with Clark, Boston, and Mitchell. You build around that core. You do not break it apart because of theoretical concerns or speculative free agency scenarios. The correct path forward is straightforward. Indiana should offer Mitchell a competitive contract that reflects her all-WNBA status, ideally a multi-year deal that balances commitment with flexibility. At the same time, the Fever should aggressively pursue defensive-minded wings or frontcourt reinforcements to address their weaknesses without sacrificing elite offense. Defensive problems are solved by adding pieces, not by removing your second-best scorer. Long-term financial challenges may arise in 2 or 3 years when extensions and max contracts converge, but that is a future problem, not one that should dictate present decisions. Right now, Indiana should maximize its competitive window, preserve continuity, and allow this group to grow under Stephanie White's system. Re-signing Kelsey Mitchell is not a debate, not a gamble, and not a luxury. It is the obvious, responsible, and necessary move. Anything less would be a failure of leadership.